Have you ever spent hours memorizing new English words, maybe 50, 100, or even more, only to forget almost all of them by the end of the week? You write them in your notebook, repeat them out loud, even use flashcards. And still, nothing sticks. You see the word consider in a news article and you think, wait, I studied that one. But your brain draws a blank. I know exactly how that feels, because I used to do the same thing. My name is Daniel, and for a long time, I believed that if I just worked harder, memorized more, and forced my brain to remember, eventually something would click. So I set a goal: memorize 100 English words every single week. I created color-coded flashcards, wrote them on sticky notes all over my room, even recorded myself reading definitions and played them while I slept. It sounds intense, right? It was. For 6 weeks straight, I pushed myself. Every morning before breakfast, I reviewed 20 words. At night before bed, I reviewed another 20. I even quit playing games on my phone, just so I could use vocabulary apps instead. But here's the problem: by the end of those 6 weeks, I looked back at my notes, tested myself on random words from the first week, and I had forgotten almost everything. It was like none of it had ever entered my brain. I still couldn't remember how to use although in a real sentence. I still confused remind and remember. And worst of all, I felt like a complete failure. What was the point of all that effort, if none of it stayed in my head? I started questioning myself. Was I just not smart enough? Was I too old to learn a new language? I watched other learners on YouTube who seemed to speak so fluently, and I felt embarrassed. I didn't want to tell anyone I was struggling. Then one day, something happened that pushed me over the edge. I was chatting online with a friend I had met in a language exchange group. Her name was Clara, and she was from Canada. She asked me a simple question: what do you usually do on weekends? Easy, right? But I froze. In that moment, my brain started searching for words I had studied. I remembered that I had memorized the phrase hang out with friends, and do chores, and go for a walk. But could I use any of them in a real sentence? No. I stared at my keyboard, then typed, nothing special. Clara responded kindly, but I felt crushed. How could I memorize hundreds of words, and still not be able to answer a basic question? I closed my laptop, sat in silence, and asked myself, what am I doing wrong? That question changed everything. Because instead of trying to push harder, I decided to stop. To pause. And for the first time, I stopped focusing on how many words I was learning, and started thinking about how I was learning them. That's when I discovered something that completely shifted my learning, and honestly, my confidence too. And that's what I want to share with you in this video. Because I know I'm not the only one who has felt stuck, frustrated, and hopeless when it comes to remembering English vocabulary. If you've ever felt like English is slipping away no matter how hard you try, I hope my story gives you some clarity, and maybe even a few tools that will actually work. In the next part, I'll tell you exactly what I changed, and why it finally made the difference between I studied this word and I actually use it now. So there I was, sitting in front of my laptop, frustrated, embarrassed, and honestly, ready to give up. But I didn't quit. Instead, I started doing something I had never done before. I looked back and asked myself one honest question. What do I actually remember, and why? I opened my old vocabulary notebooks, the apps I had used, even my voice recordings. And suddenly, something strange jumped out. There were a few words I did remember clearly. Not many, but a few. Words like rush hour, awkward, and genuine. And I asked myself, why these? Why not the hundreds of others? That's when I realized something very simple, but powerful. Every word I remembered was connected to a real moment in my life. I remembered rush hour because I had seen it in a YouTube vlog about New York traffic, and I laughed out loud at how crazy the subway looked. I remembered awkward because I had used it to describe myself after I spilled water on a Zoom call with an English-speaking group. And genuine? Clara used it once when she said, "You seem like a genuine person," and I had to look it up. But it stuck, because it was about me. Suddenly, I realized something no textbook had ever taught me. I was memorizing words. But I wasn't giving them a life. No wonder they didn't stay in my memory. I was trying to learn English like I was preparing for a spelling test, not like I was preparing to live with the language. That realization made me change everything. I stopped trying to learn 100 words a week. Instead, I chose 5 words a day. But I learned them deeply, not just quickly. I started using the 3-touch rule, which became my secret weapon. I'll explain it here because I think it might help you, too. The 3-touch rule means, I don't count a word as learned until I've touched it in 3 real contexts. Here's what I did. First, I would hear the word in a natural conversation, maybe from a podcast, YouTube video, or an English-speaking friend. This was the first touch. Then, I'd read the word in an article or book. I made a habit of reading one short blog post in English every night, and when I saw the same word again, my brain would go, "Oh, there it is again." Finally, the third touch, I used the word in a sentence, out loud or in writing. Either with my language partner, or just to myself while making tea. It didn't matter. The moment I used it, I felt like it was mine. Suddenly, the words didn't just sit in my notebook, they lived in my life. Instead of memorizing the word disappointed with a definition, I remembered saying to myself, I felt disappointed when I forgot everything during the conversation with Clara. It became personal, emotional, real. And I didn't forget it. That changed the game for me. I also started something else, something very small, but incredibly powerful. I began keeping up my word journal. Every time a word stuck, because of emotion, story, or mistake, I wrote it down. But not just the word. I wrote where I saw it, how it made me feel, and how I used it. No translations. Just English. My English. This journal wasn't for school or a test. It was for me. It became my personal map of how English started fitting into my story, not someone else's textbook. And that's when I finally began to feel like I wasn't just studying English. I was actually learning to live with it. The crazy thing? After just 3 weeks of using the 3-touch rule and my word journal, I joined a conversation class online. We talked about first impressions. I didn't plan anything. But during the chat, I said, I think a smile always leaves a genuine first impression. And I didn't even pause to think. That was the moment I knew something was working. I wasn't memorizing. I was remembering. I was using English, not just studying it. And I want to ask you something, because this is what made me reflect a lot. Do you think schools should focus less on memorizing and more on connecting words to real life? Or do you think we still need tests and drills to build a strong foundation? I'd love to know what you think. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one. In the next part, I'll show you exactly how I practiced speaking, even when I had no one to talk to. This part was hard, but it's also where things started to accelerate. So I was finally starting to remember words, not by memorizing them, but by connecting them to real things in my life. But there was one big problem left. Even though I could remember words, I still couldn't say them easily. You know that moment when you know the word, you're sure you know it, but when it's time to speak, your brain just freezes? That was me. I'd be in a group chat or video call, and someone would say, "What do you think, Daniel?" And I'd feel it, that pressure in my chest, the panic in my head. I had ideas. I had the words. But nothing came out. I'd smile awkwardly and say, I agree, just to survive. The worst part? I started avoiding conversations. Even with Clara. I told her I was busy, but really, I was just scared of messing up again. So I asked myself another hard question: how can I speak English when I'm too afraid to speak English? I didn't have a teacher. I didn't live in an English-speaking country. And I couldn't afford a private tutor. That's when I discovered something that honestly changed everything for me again. It's going to sound weird at first, but I started talking to myself. I mean, really talking. Out loud. Like a crazy person. But it worked. Here's what I did. Every morning while making tea, I picked one word from my word journal and made myself use it in a mini conversation with myself. For example, if the word was rush hour, I'd say something like, "Okay, Daniel. Imagine you're late for work. You get stuck in traffic during rush hour. What do you do?" Then I'd answer. I would probably get frustrated. But maybe I'd listen to a podcast to stay calm. Sometimes I played both roles, like a little play. "Hi Daniel, how was your morning?" "Oh, not great. I got caught in rush hour again. Took me an hour to get to work." Sounds silly, right? But here's the thing, I was training my brain to recall and produce English under real-time pressure, even if the only pressure came from my own imagination. And slowly, it started getting easier. One of the biggest tools I used during this time was something called shadowing. Maybe you've heard of it. It's where you listen to a native speaker, maybe from a podcast, TV show, or YouTube video, and you repeat what they say in real time, trying to match their rhythm and tone. I started small, just 2 minutes a day. I chose a podcast called The English We Speak because the episodes were short and used real, modern English. I'd press play, listen to a sentence like, "He's always late, it's driving me mad," and I'd repeat, "He's always late, it's driving me mad." At first, I was slow and clumsy. But after a week, my pronunciation started improving. After 2 weeks, I began to hear myself sounding more natural. It gave me confidence. I combined shadowing with another little trick that helped more than I expected, recording myself. Every Sunday, I picked a topic, like my weekend, my favorite food, or a childhood memory, and I recorded myself talking for 2 minutes. Then I listened back. Now, I hated it at first. My voice sounded awkward. I made mistakes. But listening to myself was like watching game footage after a match. I could see where I hesitated, which words I forgot, and what I needed to work on next. And slowly, week after week, I improved. I wasn't speaking like a native speaker, but I was finally speaking like me. And for the first time, that was enough. One day, Clara messaged me again. She said, "Hey, want to do a voice call instead of texting?" I stared at my screen for a few minutes. I was nervous. My heart beat fast. But I said yes. The call lasted 15 minutes. Was I perfect? No. Did I make mistakes? Absolutely. But for the first time ever, I answered her questions without freezing. I even made her laugh once, when I said I loved Vietnamese food but was terrible at cooking it. After we hung up, I felt something new, proud. Not because I was fluent, but because I was brave. And I want to ask you something, honestly. Have you ever avoided speaking English, even when you had the chance, just because you were afraid to mess up? Be honest. I did it for years. But admitting it was the first step to breaking it. If that's been you too, I promise you're not alone. In the next part, I'll tell you about the moment I realized I was finally becoming an English thinker, not just a learner, and the one habit that helped me cross that line. A few weeks after that voice call with Clara, something unexpected happened. I was walking home from the grocery store, thinking about what to cook for dinner. I remember the sun was setting, and I was a bit tired. Nothing special. But then, right in the middle of the street, I caught myself doing something I had never done before. I was thinking in English. Not on purpose. Not to practice. Just naturally. I remember the thought so clearly, maybe I'll just boil some noodles and add whatever's left in the fridge. It was a simple, boring sentence, but it was in English. I didn't translate it from Vietnamese. I didn't even realize what I was doing until halfway through the thought. And I stopped walking for a second. I stood there with a plastic bag full of vegetables, smiling like an idiot. Because I realized I wasn't just learning English anymore. I was living it. This wasn't about memorizing vocabulary or passing a test. This was about becoming the kind of person who uses English as a tool, not as a performance. And it wasn't magic. It wasn't talent. It was just slow, simple, daily steps that added up. That's when I added one last habit that tied everything together. I started keeping a daily reflection log. Just 3 to 5 sentences a day, written in English, about my thoughts or feelings. It wasn't a diary. I didn't write about big things, just small observations. Things like, today I felt frustrated because I couldn't explain a joke in English. I'm proud that I used the word spontaneous correctly in a sentence today. I wonder if people ever think in 2 languages at the same time. This small habit did something powerful. It helped me connect English to my inner voice. The part of me that feels, doubts, hopes, wonders, that voice began using English. It wasn't about grammar. It wasn't even about perfect vocabulary. It was about making the language mine. And over time, I began to realize that fluency isn't just about speed or accuracy, it's about ownership. Owning your mistakes. Owning your weird pronunciation. Owning your tiny victories, like remembering the word although in the middle of a sentence. That's what builds confidence, not perfection, but progress you can feel. A few months after that moment on the street, I had to attend a job interview, in English. Yes. The very thing I had once failed at. This time, I still felt nervous. But I walked in differently. I told them about my skills. I told them about my passion for learning. I told them about the English journey I had taken. At the end, the interviewer smiled and said, you're not a native speaker, right? But you speak with such comfort and clarity. It's really impressive. I didn't get the job. But I walked out of that building feeling like I had won something much bigger. I had finally become the kind of English speaker I once dreamed of being, not perfect, but real. And here's what I want to ask you. What does fluency mean to you, honestly? Is it sounding like a native speaker, or feeling comfortable expressing who you are? There's no right answer. But thinking about it might help you focus on what really matters to you. In the final part, I'll summarize the biggest lessons I learned, the one trick I still use every single day, and what I would do if I had to start all over again. Looking back, it's kind of funny. I thought learning English was about cramming 100 words into my brain every week. I thought if I just worked hard enough, memorized fast enough, I'd finally become fluent. But what I really needed wasn't more words, it was connection. Connection to the words. Connection to real situations. Connection to myself. So if I had to start over, here's exactly what I'd do differently. First, I'd stop chasing numbers. I'd stop trying to memorize 100 words a week. I'd focus on fewer words, but make each one meaningful. Make each one personal. Second, I'd use the 3-touch rule every single time, hear it, read it, and use it in a real context. Third, I'd talk to myself every day. Out loud. Even if it's just while brushing my teeth or cooking noodles. Speaking isn't a performance, it's a practice. Fourth, I'd shadow native speakers. Not to copy them, but to feel their rhythm. To train my ears and mouth to work together. Fifth, I'd keep a simple reflection log. Just a few lines a day in English. Because writing your thoughts, even badly, trains your mind to live in the language. And finally, I'd stop being ashamed of forgetting. Because forgetting is part of learning. Struggling is part of growing. The fact that I forgot everything at the beginning? That wasn't a sign of failure. That was the beginning of something real. The trick that changed everything wasn't a fancy app or expensive course. It was the moment I stopped trying to study English and started trying to live in it. If you've made it this far in the video, thank you. Seriously. I hope my story reminds you that you're not behind. You're not broken. You're not bad at languages. You're just on a path, and maybe today is the day it turns a little smoother. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. Fluency isn't about knowing every word. It's about being able to say what you need to say, with the words you do know. Start with that. I'd love to hear from you. What's one small habit you think could help you live more in English this week? Let me know in the comments. I really do read them, and sometimes, your ideas even inspire my next video. And if this story helped you at all, please like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who might be struggling right now. You're not alone. I promise. Oh, and in the next video, I'll show you how I trained my listening skills using just 15 minutes a day and no subtitles. It's simple, and it works. Don't miss it. See you there.